Hello and welcome to ATARC's webinar series. Today, topic experts will share strategies that agencies can implement to alleviate the concern of the unknown and make operations more efficient. My name is Kirsten. I'm going to be the moderator for today's discussion. ATARC stands for the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center, and ATARC is an organization that facilitates collaboration between government, industry, and academia in order to promote ongoing opportunities for cross-agency collaboration through on-site interaction, learning, and market research. So as we begin, I just want to thank all of our attendees who are popping in here today, and I want to give a special thank you to Stacy Berea, Eric Teasdale, Britta Williamson, and the entire Better Up team for making today's event possible. We are going to hear from our panelists today. We're going to have a Q&A session. We're also going to pop in a few polls for our audience to respond to. So with that, I just want to encourage our audience to engage with us in the Q&A chat of this section. Some of our panelists will be able to respond to you back and forth. And also don't forget to respond to those poll questions as they come up, because I know you want to receive your CPE credits. So I'll call for them. They'll be on the screen and you'll have an opportunity to respond. With all of that said, I love to do a quick round of introductions from our panelists. Please share with us who you are, what you do, and what agency or organization you are with. So Samantha, if we could begin with you first, please.
Sure, absolutely. Thanks, Kirsten. I'm Samantha Adrignola. I am with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. And within OPM, I am in the Human Resources Solutions Division, which provides fee-for-service services to organizations across the federal government. I manage the Strategic Consulting Program, which has performance management, organization, performance and design, and workforce planning under its portfolio. So I'm happy to be here today to talk a bit about what we're seeing with the agencies we work with in performance management.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Howard next. Howard, you're muted.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Howard Spear. I'm the Chief Information Officer at the Export-Import Bank of the United States. I'm going to represent the small agency perspective here. Human capital and human capital systems are an important part of our portfolio and an important part of making the bank run effectively. And so I'm delighted to be here at this discussion to discuss some of the new policies and how we're going to be approaching it from an IT perspective.
Great, thank you. Let's go to Rudolph next.
Hello, I'm Rudolph Rojas. I'm with the U.S. Department of Agriculture. As most of you may know, USDA is an agency of about 70,000 employees, so there's quite an ecosystem of employees and customers. Most of the employees are required to participate in this new program, the executive order, starting with annual reviews and regular scheduled training programs. So I'm myself in information technology management. We manage hardware, infrastructure applications, and security for 4 of the agencies within USDA. So.
Great, thank you. Andrew, let's hear from you next.
Hi, everybody. Andrew Petrie here at the Department of Energy. I am, I think I have the longest title on that bio slide that was up earlier. I work in for our CIO in resource management, and that's effectively human capital, budget finance, and acquisition for IT. So I'll be bringing that perspective. I sit on a series of meetings with our Chief Human Capital Officer that feeds back into OPM. And so I'm kind of bridging from Howard's perspective on IT and Rudolph's into some of the applications here at the Department of Energy.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, and then Britta.
Hi, everyone. I'm Britta Wilhelmsen, Strategy and Enablement Lead with Better Up's government team. Been with Better Up for the past 3 years or so, and in my role, I work closely with a number of our largest federal, civilian, and state and local partners, really to help them build and drive their workforce capacity, ultimately in service of their mission. Prior to Better Up, served several years in public sector consulting. I worked mostly with DHS agencies like CISA and the U.S. Secret Service. And my work there focused mainly on change management and technology enablement. So helping agencies modernize in a way that's scalable while still meeting their mission. And just to give a little bit about what BetterUp does, that's pretty much it. So we combine technology and AI, one-on-one human coaching, and behavioral science to drive outcomes that matter most to each agency. So we work with some of the world's top organizations, DoD, federal civilian agencies, and the intelligence community, to private sector leaders like Google, IBM, and Disney. So really excited to be part of this today.
Fantastic. Really excited to have you all here. We're going to begin with a poll question for our audience because it relates well to the first question that will come up. So if I could please get poll number 1 on the screen. And again, for our audience, if you respond to these, you'll receive your CP credits after attending this session. So please share with us, how often does your team currently hold structured performance feedback conversations, whether it be an annual review once a year or quarterly, monthly, or weekly or more? So please take a moment to respond to that. And then with that, I'm going to ask our first question here to our panelists. We'll see how many responses we can get through. But Samantha, I'd love to start with you first. Since the June 17th OPM guidance, can you share with us how your organization has moved from annual reviews to ongoing feedback-driven performance management, and what early signals are able to tell us that it's working?
Yeah, thanks. So first, I just want to acknowledge that, continuous performance management as a concept has been around for a long time. And it's been a well-known best practice in government for a long time as well. So OPM's been encouraging agencies to put strategies and systems in place that allow for that continuous performance to just be a natural part of the ebb and flow of work for a supervisor and employee. But we're really hopeful that the newest guidance from June can help drive that forward. Some strategies we're trying to promote right now with our customers are things like more regular one-on-ones. So, often targeting those one-on-ones to things outside of just the like resource needs and tactical things you might talk about in a one-on-one, but actually build in performance discussion into those one-on-ones so that you can have constructive feedback sort of become normalized as part of your conversations between supervisors and managers. But sometimes more formal processes, and this is sort of what the newest guidance is alluding to, sometimes more formal processes like actually doing quarterly or monthly performance discussions and labeling them that way actually helps, because it helps a supervisor and employee to sort of raise their heads out of the work day to day and assess the progress that individual is making towards goals. So that can be enabled through technology and data, but it really, having those more regularly really helps go a long way to changing a performance culture in general. Some interesting side effects is that when you formalize those conversations, it actually can make it more obvious to employees, high performers and low performers, that the managers care about their performance, care about their success, and are watching and observing how well they are doing. So it really helps to set that culture. But managers do need the tools and strategies to operationalize that. So that might mean training supervisors on how to deliver effective feedback. It's continually a challenge for all of us who supervise to make sure that we're delivering that effectively, but also tools built into our IT systems that allow for more regular documentation of feedback, or more integrated data on performance targets. So those kinds of things help supervisors just to be able to integrate that in. So early signs, I think, just the work that we've done with agencies over time, trying to implement some of these things from a grassroots perspective, agencies that are better able to implement more continuous performance management really see more progress towards organizational performance goals as well. So that's typically what we see.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Howard, I'd love to hear from you next on this question.
Great. Well, I'd like to pick up on what Samantha was saying, which I think is normalization is an important part of this, and kind of demystifying what do we even mean when we talk about performance management. here at XM, it's a small place, so we obviously don't deal at scale. But as Samantha mentioned, there have been a number of best practices that are being codified in the OPM guidance that the agency, I think, has been focused on. One of the things that I would highlight is putting performance in context of what is the mission of the agency, what's the agency strategy, what does the agency consider its objectives, what does success look like from the agency, and then what we're really trying to do is tie staff's I'll call it activity and the context of performance in that context of what the mission is and what does success look like there. So as an example of bridging that with technology, we don't write any human capital technology or independently procure it. It all comes through shared services, but we use OPM's USA performance. And we have a pretty rigorous implementation of it. And that's not a technical implementation, but the agency's strategic plan is there. Your performance goals need to be tied to elements of the strategic plan. The strategic plan breaks down its elements into outcomes that can be observed and can have measures associated with them. And then the performance of the activity or the work that we're holding staff accountable are tied to that. So I think when we can create that context of this is what performance looks like, these are the kinds of outcomes, right, that equate with performance, and this is what good looks like, this is what great looks like. Then I think we further the conversation, and so I think the point I would make is that notwithstanding the technology, I think it's just very important that you set the context of the performance that matters, how it relates to the objectives, and how do you sort of get to the ground truth of the outcomes, right? That your work relates to, that relates to whether it's acceptable for performance or outstanding performance.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that perspective. And rolling right along with this subject, Andrew, I'd love to hear from you next on if there's any specific tools or training programs or digital platforms that are being rolled out to ensure that the supervisors can really give that real-time data-informed feedback that I know people are looking for.
Yeah, so I can only speak for energy, right? Just like all of us here. But so one of the things we are doing, right, and we are implementing the changes as of October 1st for our agency. So we haven't implemented any of it quite yet, but we're in the process of doing that. So to that end, we are training the supervisors, and our very first session is at 1 o'clock today. There will be others, right? But it's explaining what those changes are. And for us, it'll be on a quarterly basis as a minimum, right? And so a lot of these guides are, to the point Samantha and Howard were making too, or, what these are best practices or these are the minimums, right? But I feel like probably most of the folks on this call, and I've experienced it myself, right, is it often receive feedback once a year or at best twice a year officially. And so it's looking towards more of that coaching model. And I experienced that when I was with private sector before I became a Fed, of continuous feedback, right? And that is at the heart and core of what this memorandum is about. So for us, we're implementing it quarterly. We're doing training now with our supervisors. This dovetails into a lot of changes that this agency is doing with our HR IT systems, and specifically it's with Workday. So that's not necessarily a new technology. It's new for us, and it's new for at least cabinet level agencies. I know there are other parts of the federal government that have Workday and successfully launched it, but we will be the first cabinet level agency, and it goes live. Well, it's a soft launch at the end of August, and then it rolls out in October for everyone. But what that does enable is it's replacing for us in this year 4 individualized and customized IT systems into one. So it's easier for performance and all the HR tools that have at your disposal on that platform. The other one that we've been working on since last year, but really launched it this year, is our AI toolbox. Now we branded it JewelX for Jewel Experience, but within it, it has a number of tools that are at the supervisor or employee's disposal. And some of it's stuff like position description builder, and it automates that for supervisors. That not necessarily performance-based, but it's an HR application that is making it easier for our staff. Another one is Energy GPT, which uses Gemini's AI platform. And with that, you can role play, right? You can practice, hey, I need to have a crucial conversation, a challenging conversation, provide feedback. You can use that to role play. You can map out what your bullet points are ahead of time. And so those are some of the tools we're highlighting for our staff. We also have a number of training, live demonstrations and training ones that we're rolling out over the next couple months. And we have a commercial system we use called Udemy that is a COTS e-learning application for our staff to just augment and provide additional feedback for our federal employees.
Yeah, thank you. Rudolph, I'd love to hear from you next.
Sure.
Mhm.
To be honest with you, really, the OPM executive order has been enlightening, but in my experience, I've been with government 7 years. I come from private industry. I was working in California and Silicon Valley and some of the tech companies out there, and they had pretty robust performance plans, PIPs, and so forth. But here at USDA, we have a very visionary and very far-reaching CIO team, and we've implemented a tool, overall training tool called AgLearn, which allows one to create their annual performance plan and their performance reviews to schedule on a quarterly basis. So this is something that really has been ongoing ever since I've been there. So notwithstanding the new OPM executive order, we've kind of been on that curve and over that curve as long as I've been here. We also use some great tools like Precipio, and we were using LinkedIn, but with the new administration coming in, they've gotten rid of some of the training platforms. I don't know why. I guess financial costs and so forth. But nevertheless, Precipio allows you to do analysis of your interests, what your core workload should be, and what your work track is, and it allows you to build on that and to train to that and develop metrics that you can share with your manager. So your manager is aware of everything that's going on. It's incumbent on the manager, supervisor, whatever the case might be, to make sure that you're following up on that. All right. So it's kind of a two-edged sword here. It's incumbent on the employee to do his work to kind of determine what his track is in conjunction with what the goals of the agency are. Now, I work for a group called Farm Production and Conservation, which is a conglomeration of 4 agencies. And we manage, as I mentioned, the infrastructure, hardware, security for those agencies. And so there's quite a few areas I could concentrate on, and I'm concentrating on security. I'm using Precipio to kind of guide me into some courses and some training work that I can use, which is included in our costs, so we don't have to go off-site to do training. And then I meet with my manager to check goals, to make sure that I'm meeting my requirements. Unfortunately, I got a heavy workload, so it's sometimes hard to keep up on those. But again, it's on me to do that, to make sure that my training, meets my goals that I've set at the outset. Our outset starts October 1. Again, this new OPM guideline, I believe, comes in September of this year for the coming year. So we're gonna really hit the ground running even further. But again, as I mentioned, since I've been at USDA, we've been pretty proactive about it in terms of performance plans, goals, training, and meetings. So I'm pretty impressed with the way it was. I wasn't expecting that, honestly, when I came into government, but it's been really good. So.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Britta, I'd love to hear your perspective, since you're our industry representative, on foundational steps that agencies can take to shift to a true performance enablement culture. And how does your platform support embedding continuous data-driven feedback into existing supervisor workflows at scale?
Yeah, I think the first step required before any other steps are taken is really just a mindset shift kind of at the top level that we can then trickle down, for lack of a better phrase, to the lower levels of employees from the ground up. And so I think it requires us to kind of reframe this new OPM guidance as something that we just have to comply with and check the box on, to actually thinking about it as more of a culture shift. And I think some of you have kind of already spoken to that. We have to, agencies have to move from thinking about performance management as this annual paperwork exercise, this sort of reactive process, to much more of a proactive exercise. I think, Rudolph, you just kind of alluded to that. So seeing it as continuous, ongoing performance enablement that's always happening throughout the year. So I think the next step is alignment. And so what I mean by that is connecting individual goals and development directly to operational priorities. So employees can really see how their growth is impacting the bigger picture. They can see themselves in the mission of the organization, and that's going to make them much more likely to want to continue with their self-development. And then it's also about building the right capabilities. So for example, at BetterUp, we have what's called the whole person model. This is grounded in behavioral science. It's made up of all of the mindsets and behaviors that our research has found are most critical to driving outcomes that many agencies care about, like performance and retention. And we've mapped this model and these mindsets and behaviors to OPM's new ECQs, which focuses on skills like, driving team performance, thinking strategically, driving accountability. And so I would also say another step is just building trust, two-way trust, both with supervisors and their direct reports. That's kind of a non-negotiable to be able to have that continuous ongoing performance enablement. So trusting that you're able to give and receive honest, constructive feedback. That's not an easy task. And so that's a skill that needs to be built. So building trust. And also just when it comes to the data itself, I would say being able to trust that the data is reliable and valid is certainly part of the process as well.
Yeah, thank you, Britta. Any other comments from the panelists on that before we move on to my next question, or I call for a poll, because we have just a little bit of time here if anyone wants to add anything else?
I think I might jump in on and add on that one. So Britta covered that question really, really well. I think the only thing I would add is that sometimes we see at agencies kind of a fundamental breakdown in like how the jobs are set up in a way. So there's this kind of element of like how jobs are contributing to the overall performance and mission of the organization. And so it does really relate to the other pieces of HR. And so making sure that even just the fundamental position management and that the duties are described for these jobs, so that it really helps document the clean line between, organizational mission and what this person, is accountable to and what they're doing. And then it helps you create better performance plans, and all of that aligns much better when you're sort of going back to your good HR fundamentals as well.
Yeah, thank you, Samantha. That kind of leads into the next question I was going to bring up, and I was wondering your perspective on it too, is just about striking that right balance between being able to hold people accountable to metrics while also still fostering a culture of continuous learning and growth. So, is there anything on that specifically that you could speak to as well?
Sure, yeah. So I think this again goes back to building that culture where performance expectations are clear, but then there's also clear feedback delivered that leaves room for a dialogue. So that's kind of an art, right? You can hand people their performance data, you can hand them metrics, you can point out where maybe they're lacking or where they're ahead of the curve on their performance for the year. But then being able to actually turn that into a dialogue and a conversation is really the art form of that. And I think that's where sometimes managers trip up on having these effective conversations. They start to envision what that dialogue might look like, and it seems like a conversation they don't want to have. And so often they'll avoid that. But what we see is training managers. I love that there's a the energy is moving to some tools that allow for kind of role playing and AI. That's really cool. But allowing managers to practice and delivering feedback and having conversations about performance so that it is a two-way dialogue. Yes, you want to be very clear with the feedback you're giving and what your expectations are, but you do want to hear what things are, challenging the employee, where they're getting hung up, because there could be areas there that then you can promote that learning and growth and help get people the skills that they need to be able to perform at higher levels. So this does great things, no matter if you're talking about, of course, improving performance for mid or low performers. But if you're talking about motivating high performers, we know, countless studies show that the opportunity for growth in learning is a key motivator for high performers. Most high performers don't want to go into their performance discussion and hear, "Oh, no feedback for you. You're doing great." While that's nice to hear on one side, on the other side, it's often demotivating because you're not really getting pushed to grow and learn. And so just having that conversation and enabling managers, training managers, giving them the tools to be able to make that a dialogue is the most, I think, ROI kind of investment in making sure that this becomes more of a growth mindset versus kind of a punitive performance culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Howard, I'd love to hear from you next on that balance between holding people accountable to the metrics, but also fostering that culture of continuous learning.
Yeah, I think to me part of this is the difference between it, if you will, the standard for the versus the aspiration is one way I think about this, particularly as I think about our performance management system. And what I mean by that is, I'd like to say, like, performance is perfection might be the goal, but it is not the standard, right? And if I thought about that kind of in that USA performance perspective, it's like, what does it mean? What does like really excelling look like? But understanding that's what that is what a high performer looks like versus the what is the standard of performance, so that you actually have that opportunity for growth. I think the word building trust was mentioned, and I think Britta mentioned that. And I know recently I finished the book by Stephen Covey on the speed of trust, and just the trust tax, which is basically, if you visualized, if you were interacting with a team, when you've had a high trust team, what does that interaction look like? When you've got a trusted relationship between a subordinate and a supervisor, what does that relationship look like? And people will talk about it as smooth, efficient, and whatnot. And when you have those low trust relationships, become paper ridden, painful, time consuming. And the interesting thing is he frames this as the trust tax, but it's not a tax that buys you schools or roads or other things that are good for society. It's pure waste. And so I think the other thing that sort of picked up here is in this balance. You have to create that space to have trusted, truthful conversations, have the EQ, I guess, right, to be able to engage in that properly. And then I think the last thing I'd say here is, one of the other metaphors I look at is, like, we're talking about people, and we use the word accountability, and trying to turn the corner in this memo of thinking about people as machines, right? That because machines don't have accountability, right? Machines don't have a notion of trust. We're talking about people here, and so how do we shift that conversation to understand we're talking about human capital performance management, right? Not the management of machines. And so what are the key differences that we have to focus on?
Yeah, thank you, Howard. I'm going to call for our next poll question, please, if we could get that up on the screen. So again, for our audience, this is poll question number 2. Please take a moment to respond to it. Which enablement capability would best empower supervisors to deliver ongoing data-backed feedback? So please take a moment. Our options include a consolidated performance insights dashboard, just-in-time microlearning modules, AI-driven feedback prompts and playbooks, or automated pulse surveys with trend alerts. ATARC, if you could leave that up on the screen for just a moment so everyone can have an opportunity to respond. Okay, any other comments from our panelists based on what's just been shared before I move on to the next question? Anyone who wants to jump in can share. Otherwise, I'll just move on to our next question. All right, Andrew, I'm going to call on you then, which I want to hear from you on how you're aggregating and analyzing workforce data. So like pulse surveys or performance metrics in order to spot trends and guide strategic interventions.
Yeah, certainly. So, I'll say two things. First, as we shift to Workday, one of the things that I think challenged a lot of leadership within my agency as we transitioned over earlier this, late winter, early spring, was most of them coming from private sector, had I will say, maybe underwhelmed with some of our HR IT systems, right? And they're used to, a SaaS-based platform like Workday, right? And it wasn't ready for launch yet. So I think those kind of tools where I can quickly look at my org, I don't need somebody to build me an org chart. I can look and see the performance without asking for a data call and then coming back, a day or two later with the answer there, right? And having that immediately at their fingertips helps inform leadership on what is the true potential of their organization or at least their past performance, right? And then the other part of that is, hey, are folks actually doing what they're supposed to do? So, I think one of the questions I saw in the Q&A earlier was, hey, kind of summarize what is it for OPM? And I think we talked about the culture and stuff, but really a lot of this onus now is on supervisors and meeting those demands, right? And so now you can see whether or not supervisors, once the performance aspect for us launches, really are meeting what those requirements are. And and the other part of this is tying it back to, SMART goals. We basically have said that without saying it as SMART goals. And for us, we have 9 initiatives or pillars our secretary has said thou shalt do as an agency. So how are you advancing in one of those 9? That's what I suspect or expect will be our guidance going into next year. So then measuring that and putting it into our system, not just from a compliance perspective of, hey, have supervisors done the job they're required to do, right, as a critical element, but also then how are the individual employees advancing that mission or advancing what our agency leadership has said is the goal.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And thanks for responding to that audience question too. So, Britta, with OPM's new guidance emphasizing data-driven accountability, could you speak to how agencies are, or how your agency is able to help others translate performance metrics into actionable insights for supervisors? And can you share a concrete example of that?
Yeah, absolutely. So just coming at this from the perspective of BetterUp. So I mentioned at the beginning, we work with many agencies in the federal civilian space, intelligence community, state and local. And so what we see is that this term accountability doesn't just mean collecting performance data and letting it go into a black hole, as can happen sometimes, but actually using it to make really clear, really timely distinctions in performance, and then also to hold supervisors accountable for the growth of their own teams as well as their own personal growth. And so from BetterUp's perspective, we treat this data as a catalyst for real behavior change, and we work closely with agencies to turn their performance analytics into true actionable plans for these supervisors. So just to the second question around an example of concrete impact, We have a partnership with one of our federal civilian agencies. After about 5 months or so of participating with BetterUp, we have a group of senior executive service members that we work with there. They saw measurable gains in areas that map directly to OPM's critical elements. So things like achieving results, we saw a gain of about 23% in that ECQ, and then driving efficiency, we saw a gain after about 5 months of 22%. And so I would say the key is just not leaving supervisors to interpret the data on their own, but giving them a tool and a platform that really meets them where they're at and delivers personalized insights, real-time nudges, resources, all of that, so that they know exactly what actions they need to take based on the data that they're collecting and receiving. And also helping them interpret that and understand what it means for them as an individual and also for the organization. So that's kind of what I would say. And then I just want to say one more thing about that trust piece. I know this has come up a couple of times, but I was just thinking about the importance of trust in the process of driving accountability too, because you can't hold someone accountable if they don't trust you, right? And so I think thinking about the research that we've done at BetterUp, when employees perceive their leaders as trustworthy and inclusive, they report significantly higher levels of belonging, perceived organizational support, team engagement, team innovation, and we see actually 50% higher team performance when employees see their leaders as trustworthy. So that directly connects back to that accountability piece too, I would say.
Yeah, amazing. Thank you.
Yeah.
Samantha, I want to hear from you next. If you could share us any early wins or measurable results on engagement, retention, or mission delivery that have come from your experience of more frequent feedback loops.
Yeah, so what we find when we look at the Federal Employee Viewpoint Survey data, which I know is analyzed by all kinds of folks, who work across with federal employees in the private and public sectors, as the key engagement metrics for government. We found close ties between agencies who have like strong strategic goals and plans, and then are able to cascade that down and like clearly define and communicate down to the employee levels, how an individual's performance, an individual's job relates back to that mission. They tend to have higher engagement index scores on the FEVS. And so in terms of the employees we've worked with, on the services side, they do report feeling more valued and connected to the agency's mission. As you increase those feedback cycles, it helps them to feel as if they are, contributing to that more regularly, clarifies their expectations, and it also allows for opportunities to recognize their contributions more frequently as well. On the retention side, I would say, I will say the retention data has been hard to pin down, obviously right now within agencies because of the DRP and the restructuring activities, but historically, and even, anecdotally, like in my own organization, when we have strong performance feedback cultures in an organization, we tend to see higher retention rates. And at some level that may seem counterintuitive in that, like, if you're really holding employees accountable, you're holding their feet to the fire, they're not going to want to stay and be around that, right? But what we've talked about here today is how a truly strong, accountable performance culture means you are holding employees accountable, but you're also doing that in a really clear and transparent way. You're having ongoing feedback conversations. You're helping people to grow and improve. And so that does end up increasing retention rates, both from your high performers who see that others are being held accountable or see themselves being recognized, and also from lower or mid performers who are able to improve. So you really do see those retention bumps as well. And I'm sure that once our retention data levels out a little bit, we're going to see that even through the DRP, where folks had, a lot of folks had an attractive option for leaving federal service. I think we'll see that those organizations that had higher performance cultures, to stronger performance cultures to begin with, were able to retain more of their strong performers through that time.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Samantha. We might have time for one more question, but before we move on, is there any other comments from our panelists based off what's been shared? If anyone wants to weigh in on anything that's been said so far.
Yeah.
Howard, go
I
ahead.
just wanted to mention really fast, with regard to the culture of accountability, um, you have a culture of accountability when fundamentally every employee holds themselves accountable, but it starts from the top, right? So I know that in a lot of the discussion I've heard, holding supervisors account, supervisors holding other people accountable, but we haven't really focused that the ultimate of when you've achieved a true performance culture is everybody holds themselves accountable. And if you look at top performing teams, whether you're the senior person or you're the junior person, everyone is holding themselves accountable. Like I said, it starts from the top, but that's when right, that you've hit that tipping point when each individual, regardless of what level they are in the organization, begins to hold themselves accountable.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Howard. Anyone else want to share? Okay. So before we get into takeaways from this discussion, I do have one more question for Britta, which is, once the initial excitement wears off, what government structures or reward mechanisms can help keep supervisors and employees engaged in this continuous feedback?
Yeah, and this is something we see a lot, and I'm sure a lot of us on the call today can relate to, you know, programs that are rolled out, and there's a lot of initial enthusiasm and uptake right off the bat, and then, months down the road, a year down the road, things have just kind of dissipated a bit. And so, with this new memo and with this new guidance, there's a lot of additional responsibilities being placed on supervisors and the general workforce, from more frequent check-ins to making sure these performance plans really differentiate across ratings. And that's a lot to sustain if you don't have the right structures in place to make sure that initial kind of enthusiasm doesn't wear off over time. And so what we've seen that works really well is embedding that change into the systems that agencies already use. So, for example, tying feedback cycles to the government-wide appraisal calendar helps keep it relevant all year long. I would also say recognition is another huge piece of this. So we've seen really good success with feedback champion programs that highlight supervisors that are modeling great accountability and coaching behaviors. And to that point about holding yourself accountable, I completely agree. But you also need that accountability partner. And that's kind of where the coach piece comes in, and coaches can be that partner for you to hold yourself accountable, and then also be able to hold your teams accountable. And then lastly, I would say making it as easy as possible for employees to engage in that process of continuous feedback. That will also allow it to be much more sustainable over time. So, integrating directly with the systems that are already being used at the agency, whether it's Workday or some other tool, it's not seen as an extra step or an extra process that's added on to their day. It's just part of what they're already doing. And we tend to see that when that is in place, engagement with programs that drive continuous feedback tend to maintain over 70-80% well after the launch of the initial program, even in the middle of really big changes, really big policy shifts like we're seeing right now. So that's kind of what I would say there as far as keeping it sustainable, and making sure it doesn't hit that peak and then peter off.
Yeah, thank you, Britta. Okay, last poll question, if we could get that up on the screen. Just want to make sure that we don't forget about this one, which is, what's the biggest barrier to shifting from annual reviews to continuous data-driven performance enablement? So please take a moment to respond to that, whether it be supervisor time restraints, no single source of performance data, a lack of confidence in giving the real-time feedback, or cultural resistance to more frequent check-ins. So for our audience, please respond to that in order to ensure your CPE credit. And with the remaining amount of time, I want to hear from each of our panelists before we go here. just what your biggest takeaway from this conversation has been and what you really want to drill home for the audience to walk away with a better understanding of before we leave here today. So we'll just go around, we'll hear from each of you. You all have a couple minutes to share your thoughts and ideas. Rudolph, could we hear from you first on this?
Good here. Yeah, can you hear me now?
Now I can,
Yeah,
yes.
so one of the things I'm going to find very interesting here is this new executive order is requiring that not everybody be given a outstanding review, and kind of somehow pigeonholing people into areas that they may or may not be cut out for. For example, I've got a group of people that are really high performers, very technical, hard workers. Otherwise, they would have taken the DRP. We all had the opportunity to take the DRP. Some of us, like me, I was only there 7 years, so it wasn't beneficial for me to do that. And I like my job, right? I love it. I'm working on some fantastic projects, for the government and for our producers out in the field. Hundreds of thousands of producers. So that said, I think it's going to be hard for the managers to kind of, either subjectively or objectively, I'm not sure how they're going to go about doing it, but kind of pigeonhole people into groups where not everybody's a high performer. Because I know, like I said, we've got some fantastic performing people, some really smart people, very impressive resumes. So I'm going to find it interesting to see how that works and see how equitable that will be, and if there will be complaints and so forth. So that's one thing I'm kind of keep my tabs on.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, let's hear from Andrew next.
Yeah, so for me, I think Britta, you just talked about like, hey, this is a big policy change, and we're talking about one of the HR related policy changes, but there's a lot happening right now this year when it comes to HR. Whether it's resumes being limited to 2 pages, some of that might seem small, but I do think that's a big change. Fundamentally, this is a private sector take on human capital, right? And so you need to have that mindset going into this, and that is, from the polling question, I think number one was supervisory time, right? I would argue that a good supervisor will make the time no matter what for their staff, and they're required to do so. So in my mind, really, it's culture, right? And so culture is the hard part to change. I have a boss who's actually on this call, former boss, I used to say, who would say that, this, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so to that point, right? So this will take some time to see if it sticks. And I think that when the rubber meets the road and how this policy is implemented at each agency, the training and how it is implemented, that is what will matter. But the main North Star metric and goal is to hold both supervisors and employees accountable, but also reward. And I think, Samantha, you were highlighting that earlier too, right? It is about accountability, and that can be a negative thing, but it's also about the positive reinforcement for those who are really successful and rewarding those behaviors.
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate that. Let's hear from Howard next.
Yeah, I think if I would sum it up for me, it's what are the outcomes that matter, and then how do you demonstrate that you're relevant in helping those outcomes occur, and I think performance management from a certain perspective is not particularly mystical. It is sort of what it says. It's to perform, and and uh, and you know. But if you don't know what outcome you want, if you can't define the outcome, if you can't define what matters, you're missing the underlying foundation for performance.
Thank you, Howard. Okay, and then let's hear from Samantha next.
Sure. I think a big takeaway for me, and I guess what I would hope others are hearing through our work with them or through this panel, and opportunities for us to all talk about this together in this space, is that if we if we could embrace this idea of continuous performance management and use this opportunity to really look at our guidance, our policies, our internal processes and tools, and really take a fresh look at how those are serving that goal. Because we've all acknowledged, right, a performance culture, a strong performance culture, continuous performance management, having that data, those data and tools accessible is important. Tying that back to organizational performance, those are pretty much givens from like a thought piece perspective, right? And so it's where the rubber meets the road. It's where we need to actually make sustainable changes that Britta talked about in order to be able to actually see this take hold in government. Because as I said at the top, we've been trying to do this for years in government, right? To implement some of these best practices. And so it's going to be incumbent on every federal supervisor, every federal manager, and to Howard's point, every federal employee to really embrace continuous performance management as an opportunity to really elevate us as a federal workforce.
Thank you, Samantha. And Britta, we will end with you.
Yeah, I would say kind of going off of what Samantha just mentioned, it's just thinking about how do we take organizational strategy, which we're really good at, right? And then technology modernization, which we're all being called to prioritize too. And then in the middle, which seems to sometimes be missing or a bit of a gap, is prioritizing the workforce at the individual level and meeting people where they're at. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do because each individual person is coming to this performance management process with different strengths, different development areas, different goals, different things going on in their personal lives that all contribute to their ability or their hesitation to grow and to develop in service of the organization. And so it's finding something that is able to meet them where they're at in that moment and make sure it's personalized, make sure it's tailored to their own development. But then being able to collect the data at aggregate and show and prove that it's actually moving the needle at the organizational level. And that's not an easy task, but I think that's what needs to happen in order to kind of get at all of these results and these outcomes that we're all trying to achieve in this new era. So that's kind of what I've been thinking about. And it's been great to hear from each of you coming at this from different agencies, large, small, OPM, and then just myself in more of the industry seat. So it's been great to be part of this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Okay, I think we have one final poll question before we go. I just want to make sure that we wrap up with this, which is just how do you want to receive your CPE credit? Or if you would like to receive your CPE credit, please take a moment to respond to that. And then I want to thank everyone who attended, all of the comments and questions that came through for engaging with us here, but also thank you to our partners at BetterUp, of course, for making this event possible and our panelists for coming on and sharing their insights. So it's been a really great hour. We really appreciate it. We hope you all stay connected. And then we have another webinar coming up, should be on the screen here shortly, but just to bring to your attention, it's at the same time on Thursday next week. Should be up here shortly. If not, you know where to register. It's the same place you registered for this one. So, all right. Thanks, everyone. I hope you have a great rest of your week, and we'll see you at the next one.
Thank you, Kirsten.